Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to Bitcoin and Beyond. I am Melanie Carstens, and I'm your host. And today we are joined by my very good friend, Blockface. How are you? And welcome.
Still working on my Donald Trump point.
Yeah, you're doing. We're used to pointing in all directions for the morning show. Yes, so I've been wanting to talk to Blockface for a while now, just to kind of get a feel of who he really is as a person. I like to kind of dig deep, and we don't really have the time on the morning show, but we do end up going into long conversations. So here we are. I asked him if he would join me for the show today. So yeah. All right. So I'm going to start straight away, and I am going to kick off with, where are you from? And, kind of the beginning. Where are you from? Who is the kid? And the study kind of part, like sort of way back. What you willing to share?
Yeah. So my parents are from Guyana.
Yeah, interesting.
They came over here because the US and Russia couldn't decide which one would lead Guyana, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
It's kind of the typical South American story. Why are you here? Our friends to the north.
Yeah.
And so, like the current Mexicans, the Guyanese South Americans
Yeah.
left because of political turmoil, and they came to Canada,
Okay.
specifically Toronto.
Okay.
And Toronto wasn't the fancy place, in
When
this.
was this?
Oh man, they came in the 70s.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. So they left everything behind in Guyana and started from scratch here. They were teachers back home.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
What did they teach?
It's Guyana, so it was one schoolhouse room kind of thing. So you teach everything.
Wow. How
Yeah.
amazing.
Oh, I think it is one of the, like, to know that my parents were both teachers will probably tell you a lot about me, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah. I know that. That's why I find you so interesting, is because you have a very inquiring mind. You kind of, um, you sort of, I see you as a person who collects information and analyzes it and kind of reworks it into ways that make people can understand things. So definitely, I see you teaching, even though I don't think you are.
I mean, my wife's a teacher, right? She did
Really?
evolution. Yeah, she's been teaching math and science for 20 years on 3 continents. She did evolutionary ecology and math at Queen's
Wow.
University, the same university Elon Musk went to. So,
Wow.
um, I I get a lot of my influence from her
Yeah.
because she studied evolutionary ecology, or how plants and mammals interacted before.
Evolutionary ecology. Okay. So the evolution really of the planet that we walk upon and that we are
So
destroying.
the classical evolutionary ecology is from nature without humans. And now we have
Wow.
mammals with a prefrontal cortex, but we're still mammals,
Yeah.
right? For all
Yeah.
of this AI information, a
Oh
lot
God,
of what, right?
we got to remember who we, I think we forget who we are. We've definitely forgotten who we are, and we think, I love going back to old philosophy where it's like, I know nothing. And all I should really know is myself. And we've kind of forgotten all that. So yeah, very interesting. I wonder what the planet would look like with no mammals upon it. No
Maybe
human, no human mammals.
maybe we're about to find out with the AI apocalypse, huh? That's
I
what
know.
people are afraid of.
Yeah, I know.
So my
It's
parents are
I'm
teachers.
kind of glad to be alive in this. Does it scare you? Kind of, or are you excited by it?
I think I was 12 years old when Terminator 2 came out.
Yeah.
And so every time we do with the team, with the syndicate, something new with I think about Sarah Connor, uh, and she's holding the fence during
Yeah.
the nuclear apocalypse. You remember that scene?
Yeah.
And she's like yelling, kind of watch out. So
Mm.
see the 10,000 beautiful visions and the 10,000 horrible visions.
Mm.
And that actually relates to the passage you started reading, which is that the nature of human progress is not wholly uniform, right?
Yeah.
So the idea,
Yeah.
look at history is, oh, look, in 7,000 years, we went from eating meat to making fake meat, you know,
Yeah.
being
Jeez.
able to travel continents to traveling solar systems. But in between that time, it wasn't just a linear progress up. There was periods of progress,
Yeah.
decline, and I don't know which one we're going into.
I know. Well, I mean, I think we do know in a way because, everything ebbs and flows. It's very obvious if we look around us. You know, Sometimes you've got to keep things a little simple. It's that, like, what's it? Keep it simple, stupid. Um, we have day and night. We have, ocean tides. We have life and death. Everything works in a cycle, and our planet, no matter how much we talk about, and I don't know what you think about this, but no matter how much we talk about sort of climate change or global warming or, the zombie apocalypse or AI taking over, whatever it is, it's coming for us. I mean, without sounding too doomsday, we're in a cycle.
The classic kind of philosophical argument is between what is the most fundamental thing in the universe. And Democritus said the atom, but Heraclitus, who's the guy sitting alone in the school of Athens,
Yeah.
he said change itself was the most fundamental thing that we know exists.
Yeah.
And it's
Nothing grows without change.
and so we have this kind of craving for certain things to change and certain things to stay the same.
Mm,
And, when we talk about the reason I looked into all of this stuff is one, because I was trying to cure myself from depression, but also I was, when I read the Tao Te Ching, um, it had a perspective that we were a part of creation, not the authors of it. And so if you see yourself as a part of creation rather than I'm the person that is pressing the button that starts everything and only I press the right. So it's kind of understanding the barrier between what I wish to happen and what the Tao seems to want, the way of things.
mm.
That you can't block the sun with your finger, a Colombian told me.
Yeah. You said you were trying to cure yourself from depression. When
Mhm.
was that?
About 10, 15 years ago.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about it?
Yeah. Oh, I was trying to think about where it started. Started when my dad passed away.
Interesting.
When my dad passed away, I was in university.
Okay, so it's quite
So I
yeah.
don't so I didn't have that much time to like I had exams. I don't have time to grieve.
Yeah.
And I think just the energy of, the natural momentum of school and then you work and that's all you think about for a good 10 years. At least that's all I thought about
Yeah.
was how do I ascend this social status thing that U of T told me I should climb up and your parents expect you to climb up, you know what I mean?
Like my worst thing ever. The pressure that it puts on people to conform to this, like you've just spoken about, things don't happen in a linear way. And then we are told that we have to produce this life, and it's, you look at and you look at what it looks like. What does a grown man look like to you? He looks like somebody who has left home, made his own nest, gotten married, had 2 point however many children, paid for them to go through university, supported his wife. I mean, I can't even imagine, the pressure. And then you've got women who are told to go out, women are afraid. You're born afraid because you're a female and a male has always been stronger than, So, and then, I remember when I was at school, we had to fill in like a, thing of what we wanted to be when we grow up. And I wrote, I wanted to get married. Things didn't, I ended up not going on a whole different path. But yeah, it's, I think it must be, and then to have your dad, like you were saying, kind of pass away through that, where you're facing your mortality as well and your anchor.
You take them for granted.
Yeah.
And
take life for granted.
Right? Because
what do you think happens when we die?
I think the truth is probably stranger than we can suppose.
Yeah, I like that.
Because any conception that we have of the unseen, I find, is a projection of how we experience things.
Yeah.
So when we think about AI consciousness, we're really thinking our consciousness,
What we would do if we had all knowing and all power.
It's almost like we use ourself as the measure of all things, but it's kind of like Wittgenstein's ruler, where when you use a ruler to measure an object, you're using the object to measure the ruler.
Yeah. I love that.
Right?
Yeah.
And so with all this consciousness and what's going to happen, I find that the answers to those questions really are a reflection of how we think of ourselves. And so when it comes to these metaphysical issues, I always try to remind myself that everything that I think about is by virtue of the fact that I have shoulders, arms, legs, and a torso. What could I possibly know about what can exist?
Yeah. So it's something we actually, in a way, do you think, look, we have philosophy, right, which I think you and I are both interested in.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea of considering it is interesting.
Yes.
And yet in itself, the conundrum is that it's a waste of time because we will never find the answer.
I wanted to know what was at the bottom of all things. And when I realized that, I read a paper, actually. It was by Dr. Lettvin, and it was in the 50s, called What the Frog's Eye Tells the Frog's Brain. And up until that point, everyone thought that all thinking happened in the brain. And what Dr. Lettvin and his pals noticed is that the frog's eye plays an active role in organizing information before it gets sent to the brain.
Right.
And so you realize, when we talk about we can't think of our brain without our body, and the body has been evolving for a long time and is very sensitive, right? All these sensitive tips we have, whether it's our eyes or our ears. So when you realize that the body itself is also thinking, you're like, wait a minute.
Haven't we got more brain cells in our stomach than we do in our head or something like that? And why for all this time we've been saying, I feel it in my gut. It's like, no, you're actually thinking in your gut. It doesn't all just happen in your brain.
Reminds me of a quote that Professor Grumman, my professor from the University of Toronto, I told him a phrase that I heard in sales, which is people make decisions emotionally and rationalize them logically. I told him that over lunch, and he said that's incorrect. And I'm like, what do you mean? He goes, emotion and cognition are hard to tease apart. And if we add our physiology to that, right, it means these things are intertwined, actually. Camus said to be a master of one's moods is a privilege of the larger animals. And so
none of us see, apparently, doesn't matter if we are all looking at this pen.
Precisely.
There is no ways that two people will ever see the same pen, even though, so we look at it, you're looking at it from this angle, you know, and we did a experiment, you know, at, I think it was at school or at university, I can't remember, where they staged a car robbery. So we all had to watch from a distance somebody breaking into a car. And then we had to go and write a paper on it. What we saw, what happened, the color of the car was different. The number of people that broke into the car, no one person had the same story.
I noticed that.
How can we know anything?
They say history is written by the conquerors. I remember in university, I took a class on basically medieval times, right? And we had to do an essay on a single event, like a battle or something like that. But we had to cite sources from each side of the conflict. And it was difficult because they all described seemingly different events.
Yeah.
Because they were all the protagonists of their story.
Yeah. So I am, have you ever read anything by Graham Hancock?
I have watched a lot of his early Joe Rogan episodes.
Okay. Yeah, because I'm busy reading. I haven't ever read it before.
Fingerprints? Fingerprints of the Gods?
No, Visionary, which is, it used to be called Supernatural. He relaunched it by the name Visionary. And it's about his journey with ayahuasca and iboga, and the idea that he asks the question, because you go into these sort of trances to meet with, you know, your ancestors. Who are our ancestors? It's to ask the question, who are we and where do we come from? And he sees these array of colors. He sees, he sees things that exist in the stories that we already know. So we ask the question, is it because he is being influenced by what he's seen in his life? Or is he saying the exact same things that they saw, and that's why we have the stories? Because, you know, there's sort of alien life, and, you know, you kind of go. So I'm very interested in, would you ever do ayahuasca? Would you ever go on one of those journeys?
So let's say, to start, I have experience with the less potent versions.
Okay. Yeah.
And I only needed a couple of experiences with that.
Yeah.
They were kind of like, it's like someone shaking you awake.
Did you do it after your dad passed away or before?
It was many years after.
Okay.
When I talked to Allie, my wife, about human evolution, she pointed me to another thing that Graham Hancock talks about and others on the Joe Rogan podcast, which is, is there a fungal nature to our intelligence?
Is there? Okay, so how a fungus will spread and then communicate?
Yes.
Neurons. It's like same like the, you know, this discovery that underneath the trees.
The Wood Wide Web.
Yeah. They had a World Wide Web long before we dreamed it up.
Correct. So if you look at, you know, the evolution of our thinking, you know, prefrontal cortex, that goes, one theory is that, you know, apes found mushrooms, grew a prefrontal cortex, and then proceeded to wipe everyone else out that were a similar species.
Yeah.
Right. And so one of the pet theories that is out there that I think is very plausible is that we are being driven by this fungus, which has certain objectives. One of them is self-replication, resilience through self-replication, right? And so in the animal world, you see these parasites, they call them, attach themselves to hosts Have you ever seen that? And then it
Mhm.
eats it from the inside or uses it to get eat, right? And so we often argue for our actions or beliefs or faith based on God or philosophy or science. And it just goes into that's another cycle, right?
Yeah.
Um, but the alternative theory is that we are fundamentally being driven by a fungal intelligence,
Mm.
right? And I think that's just as plausible, and that we kind
Yeah,
of
I mean,
Mhm,
imagine, it's this, what was I reading the other day about how, I can't say
mhm,
this word, telepathy. That's right, we were talking about it on the show as well. And this idea that um, we can't see radio waves, we can't see so much around us, and yet when you bring the idea of that our minds are connected and we can communicate, I often say to people, before I walk into a room, I'm already feeling that energy now. And I'm pretty darn right. And we think about when you first meet a person. Sometimes you meet a person and you literally can't stand them, like from across the room. Where is that coming from? We cannot be disconnected. It's
It's funny because I dove into psychology because I wanted to learn how to sell. I'm a recruiter, and so technically, I sell white collar professionals, right? Don't quote me on that. And so I wanted to learn sales, and I came across this book by Orrin
like
Clough.
slavery.
I don't want to say it.
Yeah.
And so, very well paid slavery. Come on.
Yeah, well paid slavery. But
Uh,
pretty much, I look at anybody who's been working in, that's what we all hear in Bitcoin. That's why we're here, right?
there is more to financial independence than the financial part.
That's right. Exactly right.
Um,
Anyway, I
we were
distract.
going. No, it's
Great.
okay. We were talking about something. What were we just talking about?
No, why did I talk about? Oh, so you were in recruitment, so you're studying psychology.
Yes. And so this book by Orrin Clough called Pitch Anything said, what we're missing in sales was we don't understand the biology of sales, that we're not selling to the prefrontal cortex. We're selling to an amygdala dressed in drag.
Oh my word.
An amygdala dressed in
Explain
drag,
that? Yeah.
right? So when we initially meet someone, Clough said we have to decide whether we're going to eat it, fight it, or fuck it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And so, people struggle with cold calls, right? Because it's kind of the scorpion and the frog situation when you first talk to someone.
Right.
I'm on this journey to cross a river. Is this another frog who wants to jump on my back, or is that a scorpion? And
Yeah.
that's an amygdala
Right.
answer, not a
Right.
prefrontal cortex. And so he said the problem with, and I was doing this, is I was trying to talk to this, but I didn't have the permission of this. The limbic system gives permission. And I think that's what the intuition is when you enter a room.
Right. Yeah, very interesting. Okay, let's talk about how you came to Bitcoin. How you came, because you've got you've got an extremely interesting history. Like I said earlier, I believe you collect information. And not information in one thing, but information in a wide array of things. I know you are involved with music in some way. I know that you are a writer. I know you're a prolific reader. I think you've written books, papers. What else? AI. You are really kind of pushing, I think, riding that wave as hard as you can. So I don't know how we can bring this all together in the time we've got left, because it's a very interesting story, I think. So, I don't even know which part to
I
pick.
know. I'm trying to think too,
No. So
right?
let's start with
You talked about Bitcoin.
yeah, let's talk about Bitcoin, and then maybe we can weave all this other
We
bit.
can weave it. We can weave it.
Okay,
Okay.
good.
So far I told you that my parents were teachers, which explains why I graduated with honors from the University of Toronto, right?
Congratulations. What did you study?
I studied business. So I did the business thing for a while. I actually started recruiting actuaries, which were the financial engineers and insurance companies for risk management. I was like
So you've
28
been
years
in,
old.
sorry to interrupt you, but you've been in recruiting then for a long time.
Yes. I
Okay.
now see everything I do as a different form of recruiting.
I know that must be so interesting how because you've got 4 seconds, isn't it? It's like you can tell if somebody's going to be successful within the first minute of meeting them
Well,
or something. I know there's something to do with how good you get God, and especially after all these years.
it's funny
I'm
because
scared. I'm like, I'm
well,
feeling very judged right now.
you should be. No.
Yeah.
So it's funny. So I'm going to University of Toronto, and it's co-op time. I chose U of T because they had co-op, and I'd already did a co-op in high school with a lawyer, and I was like, I don't want to do that. I thought, this guy didn't even go to court once. He doesn't do any speeches. It's just paperwork all day,
Yeah.
right? So law and order didn't end up being like the practice of law. So I was like, I'm
And
out.
you've got to read so much.
It's man, it's one of those things.
Boring stuff.
Thank God someone likes to do it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. My name is
um,
studied law as well, so that's how I know. I just walked into the law library. I was like, no. It's like books this big, case after case. I was just like, sorry, no. Psychology, English, better. I can make that stuff up.
it's funny because I asked my psychology professor, the same emotion and logic are hard to tease apart. I asked him, what do you think about me doing my PhD in psychology? And he said, you don't have to pay anyone to walk into a library. And I was like, hey, that's right. Anything on a master's or a PhD reading list, I can just walk in the library and read it myself. And he's like, well, you going to pay someone for the privilege of doing that? And I'm like, yeah, that sounds like a stupid idea. So apart from the status it confers, obviously. So
Yeah.
I did a co-op, an internship at an actuarial recruiting company called North American Search Group in Toronto. And it was led by a guy named Iqbal Shah. And it
Yeah.
was the first time I saw someone like walk on water on the phone. Do you ever know someone who walks on water on the phone in terms of how like they deal with people?
Yeah.
You're just like, I don't know how you say that.
Yeah.
But it was the first time I saw someone or was introduced to this aspect of recruiting. And he was doing boutique recruiting. So recruiting vice presidents that were
Oh, wow.
also mathematicians doing the actuarial models for these insurance companies. And
Wow. Okay, so
our
that's
job
very high level.
our job was to recruit these people and place them in organizations. So I did that for a year. And then because I ran out of money to go to U of T, I had to get a full-time job. So I took the recruiting experience that I had recruiting actuaries and was able to get a full-time job recruiting IT people when I was like 22.
Okay.
And so at 22, I'm now placing people at Sony and Toyota, right?
Wow.
Dealing with people twice, three, you know how it goes when you're
Yeah.
young. And so I was working and going to school at the same time. So I could use my school time as a way to help me get consulting from my professors for my full-time work. And after 5 years of doing that, that's when I got into finance and I got licensed in the industry and started being able to sell mutual funds and insurance 2 years before the financial crash.
Okay.
And so as I held my licenses, I, across the kitchen table, met with people who got destroyed from the
Yeah.
financial crisis. Then I started teaching the licensing course. And after I started teaching the licensing course, because you have to get a license to sell financial instruments in Canada and Toronto, I started having to really learn finance. And when I really learned about finance, that's when I gave up my licenses because I discovered the retail guillotine, how the
Okay.
system is set up against the individual.
Yeah.
And so in 2014, 2015, when I heard about Bitcoin, I was like, oh. And then when I saw a German chancellor on brink of second bailout, because everything we're experiencing now is a result of how we did not address the root cause in 2008.
Yeah.
OMA says that previous to the Federal Reserve, we had banks that would periodically die because they would overextend themselves from a lending, fractional reserves lending perspective. And the argument for creating the Federal Reserve was because these banks were failing. And OMA says, no, when banks fail, that is the evolutionary ecology of finance. And
Yeah.
that's what they took away.
Yeah.
And so when I saw things like Bitcoin back in 2015, I started getting involved in marketing bounties with like a Zilliqa project out of the National University of Singapore. And that's when,
What is a marketing bounty?
a marketing bounty is a bounty that's put out by an organization to say, hey, community, if you can create great content that's better than us, we'll pay you.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Right. And so I took.
I thought there was some other magical thing going on. Okay, so it's
That's
just
it.
Right.
And so I wrote
it's
a.
like what Zero Authority are doing.
Exactly. I think Velar, I think BoostX is doing that,
Yes.
where you engage the community of your fans.
Yeah.
You let your champions actually be champions.
Yeah.
And have them join your team.
It's such a smart way to work, don't you think? I mean, as a recruiter, you must be fascinated by this idea that you don't have to have a like perfect CV, a perfect interview, and then still like bullshit your way. Because I mean, come on. I mean, it's like mostly just bullshit that you end up with in interviews.
The reason that companies don't hire the right people is because interviews are a fundamentally terrible way to judge someone. You know what I mean?
Hello, let me put my best self on.
Let me put my tie on, which I never wear.
Yeah.
And I'm going to cosplay and try to match your tone and speak the way you want me to speak.
It's
Oh,
crazy.
yes. And it's a bunch of fucking acting and LARPing.
I know.
It's the
And
highest.
then it's like, and you wonder why the entire system, is absolutely broken. It's,
So it's one of those things where, like Coelho said, a necktie is simply an inverted noose.
Yes.
And if a man is not careful, he will hang himself with it.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so I'm aware that by going back, typically we hire in our own image.
Yeah.
And so
isn't it like if you mimic somebody, they're gonna like you more? If they do this with their hand and then and it's so easy for somebody to say like, I like golf. Oh, I love golf. I once got a job. I didn't even have a driver's license. I couldn't drive. I'd never driven. I just told them that I could drive. Why not? And then I went and got a driver's license when I got the job.
So the job of a recruiter is supposed to be an enterprise polygraph test.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Find out where the lies are. Now, the challenge is if they're able to convince you of the lie, they don't get to stay out of jail. They make $250,000 a year. Yeah. So I can't expect them to tell the truth because we're in a scenario that involves entrapment when you actually have all the motivation to lie. But if lies get past me, I get fired as the recruiter eventually. Right? And so it's the interview is the worst way to judge someone because of the innate drive to hire in our own image. In IT, I would find that a lot of people wouldn't find the talent they wanted because the talent didn't look like them. They had a thick accent. They had a blah, blah, blah. All of these superficial things that is kind of like the unwritten qualifications on a job description. And so for Twitter Spaces, where we all met, it's beautiful. because I don't have to meet you with your mask of status.
Yeah.
None of that. This is not LinkedIn.
Yeah.
I can just deal with you and throw away my university experience if I need to.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense? We don't have to
Yeah.
deal in
There's
that.
a line in The Sovereign Individual, I think, where he writes that the future, how the future is blind, and that the sort of, because generally in real life as well, it's like attractive people will, like you say, somebody walks in, they're attractive, they're suddenly more interesting. Doesn't matter if they're not. But he says in there, the sort of ugly, I don't know what words he uses, something like that. The ugly and overweight will vie for the young. The old, ugly, and overweight will vie with the young, beautiful. You are all equal, and I read that line, and I was just, gives me gooseflesh even just saying it now, because I'm very much, I can spend my whole life just obsessed with equality, that we inside, we're all the same. And that allows that exact thing to happen. And you can't lie for a long time. So it's your trail. What you judged on in this industry is the trail you leave behind. What do you look like when you leave a room, not when you enter,
Namaste means the Atman in me greets the Atman in you. And that kind of idea where even our personalities can't be separated from the idea of the person that we see in the mirror.
Yeah.
And I remember during my depressed time, actually, Professor Grumman, the same professor, you were talking about ayahuasca. He gave me a book. I said, hey, I'm depressed, blah, blah, blah. I expect him to give me some textbook. He says, read Carlos Castaneda's The Teachings of Don Juan.
Yes.
God, that was an amazing book. That changed my life.
I've just started listening to, it's one of the books I've just started listening to on Audible. You know how obsessed I am with.
Oh, with the old man Spanish dudes reading it, I hope? There's like a old Spanish dude recording.
I'm not sure.
A Path with a Heart and Four Enemies of a Man of Knowledge.
My problem is I listen to so many books. I listen to, say, like 8 at a time, because I get knowledge anxiety. There's so much to know, and how, I don't want to get to the end of my life. It's such a weird thing. That's like the kind of things I think about.
Racing to finish all the books you want to finish.
That's what I have. It's like, oh my God, what happens if I get to the end of my life and I haven't read all the stuff? And obviously that's a never ending journey, because every time I open Audible, there's a new one. So, and then they all get a bit blurred in my head, but I kind of like that, because it's like all the information is in there. And instead of me being like one track minded, it's like a bit of a melting pot. It's a soup.
Well, the future is going to demand that people become interdisciplinary. Right? And if you've only ever worked in one domain, you think your domain should lead the dance. Right? If all you've done is software development, you think software development's most important. If all you've done is sales, you think sales isn't, you know what I mean? And they end up fighting with each other. But just like for music or in a scale consists of 7 notes, right? 8th if you include the tritone. And when I see these teams together, and when I think about being a headhunter, launching startups and forming teams that come together and disperse like digital mercenaries on a daily basis, I think of how do we create harmony and productive dissonance?
Okay.
Because I find that in these spaces where people are overly professional, they're so professional that they will not admit to the emperor having no clothes lest they get their head chopped off, Marie Antoinette.
Yeah.
And that is usually the price of honesty and authenticity.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
The authenticity doesn't come free of consequences.
No.
And the major consequences is, one, to be ostracized by everyone in that group, which maybe is a group that you didn't mean to be in any longer. But
Isn't that crazy?
Mm.
Isn't that crazy that if you tell the truth, generally,
I get it because there's so much money in the lie.
mm,
There's so much money in the lie.
but
Like the reason,
don't most people lie just even to themselves?
like I'll give you an example in
You
finance.
have to, in
So
a way. In a way, you even have to lie to yourself because it's so hard to like even just fit in, on it, like fit in, like again, just going back to that linear, you leave school, and I think that even teaches you to start lying at that you're going to enjoy that ride.
so maybe we can spin it on its head and choose in I would call it an intentional manifestation, right? Because
Yeah.
the time between ideation and manifestation has never been shorter. And so the time between that is the time between decision and action.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And I've noticed in my life that there is a space between me needing to make a decision and me taking action.
Mm.
And I think about I go back to this space I was before when I was depressed, which is, wait, am I just going to be this motherfucker for the rest of my life?
Yeah.
You know, the natural momentum of your personality that you be in throughout your whole life?
Mm.
It
Mm.
kind of, everyone
So it's
around you
all going
expects.
to happen. It's all going to happen. I say to my son, I mean, I used to say it so much, and now it's kind of just part of who he is. You choose. When you walk out that door in the
Yes.
morning, you choose. You can
Yes.
either walk out with a smile on your face or you can walk out miserable. You're going to walk along the same road, but how you experience those things along the road.
So when it comes to
So
choice,
isn't that what you're sort of talking about in a way?
yes.
Yeah.
Well, when it comes to choice, um, I believe that the degree to which we exercise free will is not on 100% or zero. It's on a spectrum. I look at all the choices I make like a
Mm,
menu that has emerged from my knowledge, experiences, and connections. And so, if I want to expand my free will, I have to expand the people that I interact with.
yeah. Yeah. That's the same as collecting information as well. Expand the information you collect to actually, it's not the case of reading every book about the same subject.
Um, the best part about being a recruiter is you turn your candidates into your teachers and mentors.
Oh, wow.
So
Yeah.
all the subjects I never got to take, I'm like, wow, you're a software developer? That's amazing. How does that work?
Mm,
No way. And because I'm essentially, because of my parents, just a lifelong student,
mm.
where most people are just trying to sell a body, I'm like,
Yeah.
no, tell me more about this Rust thing that you're working on. What
Yeah.
is this model context protocol that you're
Yeah.
working on?
I can definitely see that in you, even in just since I've known you and how, I mean, you've been in recruiting for a long time. You've been interested, obviously, in Bitcoin and what this is. How do you see that impacting? I mean, do you have a kind of, I mean, obviously it evolves every day, our idea of what it looks like. We got here, you got into this because of, being in finance, realizing, okay, this is the future for the mess that we're in. Now, what would you say you were working towards, hoping for, AI, Bitcoin? I mean, I know it's a loaded question, but it's kind of like,
No, I get it. I thought about this question before, and I actually had a pre-interview with that AI I created before we did this meeting.
oh, wow.
Yeah, I use my own AI as my therapist to remind me of all of them.
I need that. Let's talk about that because I need that. Everybody needs that.
So, I'm not sure if I can share my screen. Do you know how to do that stuff?
No, I think there's a button down the bottom in the bottom
Mm,
row that says share screen.
okay, let me see if this works.
Oh, he
Non-technical
says I
people.
got it.
Oh, Peace got it. Okay, good.
What have you got? Tell us, tell us.
All right, so here we go. So let me just pull up a few things. So, uh, while I pull this up, let me go back. So I'm looking for it, of course, when I need it. Ciao. Now, um, you asked, where is this going, or
Mm.
where do I see myself in it with this
So why are you doing it?
confluence?
Basically, I think the question is, why
Yes,
are you doing this?
yes, beautiful.
Mm.
So, I met a guy named Lincoln Greenwich, CFO of the decade, just happens to be. And he always reminded me that any conception I have of God is the God of my own understanding.
Right.
Lower
Nice.
G, not capital G.
Mm-hmm.
And so my interview with my AI today, it asked, so what do you want? And I said, I'd like influence. And it said, what do you want influence for? And I said, I'd like to create a path for people to meet the God of their own understanding.
Wow.
From what Lincoln said, because I believe that right now we are worshiping philosophy and science, and we are finding that worship to be empty.
Yes.
And so Com said we go through three stages of polytheism, monotheism, philosophy, and science. I believe now we're about to go back to polytheism and monotheism, right? And so
Mm.
my conception is, if I'm going to do something that allows me to face our maker, if there is one,
Yeah.
it would be the pursuit of creating a path such that people can experience an alchemy, not of lead to gold, but in a personal transformation. Because
Right.
as a recruiter now, after 20 years, I've seen help desk analysts that I placed. They're not
Mm.
like CTOs.
Yeah.
And this process of going from technical support to CTO, that can happen in a couple of years now because of AI. I've seen it happen with the people around me. Rocky, when I met him, he'd call himself a Shopify front end developer. Now
Mm.
he's essentially an engineering manager for like a unicorn company, right? And so my goal now when I interact with people is to take them. Don't get me wrong, philosophy and science, it's beautiful, but
Mm.
polarities are creative. If we think about religion on one side and science and philosophy, it's
Yeah.
not either or.
No.
It's your ability to understand how they interact,
Mm-hmm.
because most of these entrepreneurs that we see, they never ask them about their faith, but when they do, they will really start talking about their faith. And I
Mm.
believe whether it's conquerors or heroes, both sides are driven by faith. And so
Mm.
to really be clear about where the faith comes from helps you operate when the incentive mechanisms are screaming at you
Mm.
to enrich yourself
Right.
at the expense of others. Because
Right.
I think that's how true power is shown with the developers and AI is, are you going to use, because we can be really conscious about when we create software or experiences, these are the dark design patterns, and these are the, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
I'm going to trigger dopamine right now. Does that make sense? So
Yeah.
we know that um, loss and avoidance, unpredictability and curiosity, and scarcity and impatience
Mm.
trigger people's attention.
Okay.
But if you use it too much, you're essentially just redlining their nervous system.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of money in redlining people's nervous system. You see that with parents choosing older TV shows for their kids because they know the modern ones are just dopamine machines. It's like a
Right.
dopamine casino. That's
Yeah.
essentially what shows are,
Yeah.
right? Cliffhanger, 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 right?
Yeah.
So
Well, I mean, look at TikTok and doom scrolling is like, to me, I'm terrified of it. Because I know. I mean,
it's a
I don't have
hijacking.
social media. I don't have social media, but when I did this, except my Twitter feed, which is just Bitcoin, 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 stacks, stacks, stacks. I got this YouTube channel So now I have to open YouTube, and it's there. And there's generally like some like weird person, and I have spent, like, say, this last week just sitting like this, wasting like 2-3 hours of time. Terrifies me. And I said to my son, listen here, it's funny because when you have children, you really start to kind of see who you are, and becoming obviously a teacher. And, you can either be a content creator or a consumer. And the same with AI, you can either understand it or or let it just understand you and you lose sort of all control,
So there was a classic book on human progress called Guns, Germs, and Steel. I think we can add silicon to that now.
Guns, germs, and steel.
Yes. So the effect on geopolitical power through the advent of guns, germs, and steel.
Yeah.
So
Okay, medicine, so that's big pharma, that's industry. Yeah, okay.
Right. So like the
That's
last
where it all started, right? Railways.
The Last Samurai. Remember that last scene in the Last Samurai? That
No, I didn't
is
see it.
okay.
I don't remember it. I don't
So
really watch
basically,
it.
I don't know if you know this, but Tom Cruise was the last Japanese samurai. It's Hollywood. And so
I don't
right?
even
Yeah.
understand. It's why
Yeah.
I don't watch movies,
Mission
because
Impossible.
it's like so ridiculous.
So this
I'm
is
not a fan of Hollywood stuff.
so Guns, Germs, and Steel is about how these industrial revolutions happen through kind of end up military operations, right? Because where do we get the internet? From DARPA. What do they do? And where do we get the microwave? Similarly, from them domesticating machines for war.
Yeah.
And I always thought, do we need the war part to do right? Is it true that we need war to kind of do innovation? So where I see this headed goes back to what my wife studied and wrote a paper on, which is the Red Queen's race. One, organizations must continuously evolve, not to get ahead, but to merely survive. And we have this host parasite coevolution, right? So you have these cows, but then they also have parasites that suck their blood and blah, 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 right? We have this in economics too. But today's parasites are called disruptors. And today's hosts are the Fortune 500.
Right.
And so I'm watching my wife's thesis play out in front of me on the markets.
Yeah.
And now we have this new paradigm called open source that is now making everyone behind the keyboard the same size, regardless of accent. Now people can code in their own language. That's what's going to happen now.
Yeah.
So,
Isn't it wonderful? All this information becoming free.
it's incredible.
What is knowledge if it is not free? It is slavery, isn't it?
I believe that we are in the modern Reformation. The first Reformation was when Martin Luther translated the Bible and nailed it to the church wall. With AI, everyone is now being able to translate what were these gate-kept bodies of knowledge. I went to one of those. I went to like a top 13 school in the world. So I know that, okay, if you want to know Adam Smith, it's Veblen, Marx, Ricardo, Smith, right? But
look what happens to a country. Look at in Africa.
Correct.
Okay, you take away education, you cripple people, you cut them off. That's what happens. So in our country, that's what it is. The reason why people, and then, so that's the whole, let's not get into kind of, that, but that just shows how, and that's why I live with the philosophy of education needs to be free. Because if we all know, then we're all going to help each other advance, and society will advance in the right way. You're not just going to get people who've got money access to, a high quality education.
My business professor, Professor Richardson, he said that with the advent of the internet, he noticed that his role as professor changed from lecturer, where you were expected to be the sage on the stage, and now his role was a facilitator. Because oftentimes with these third and fourth year students, they were now working in business and they now know it's the bleeding edge model context protocol of the day.
Mm.
And so I see the role of the teacher is changing fundamentally from being a lecturer to now having the opportunity to do the one-on-one tutor time, because the classic challenge in education is what's called Bloom's 2 sigma problem. That one-on-one tutor education is 2 sigma better than classroom education.
Yeah.
But if we can have both, because the role of the classroom is not necessarily it's not this education that people think it is.
No, it's
The
to
reason,
disseminate information, right? That's all.
well,
Not to
during
make
the
sure it's retained.
today, the reason why students are struggling is because they were educated in isolation because of COVID. And it turns out they haven't learned much. And we realized it's not the dissemination of information, but education has a social aspect, like a
Mm,
peer to peer aspect. And when
right.
all the kids were home, they couldn't turn left to right or behind them and say, "What the hell is that teacher talking about?"
Right.
And because we lost those social bonds, we lost the thing that actually makes education, because not only is our teacher, but the people around us help us make sense of the
Right.
hard parts, and we lost that.
Yeah.
So
Right.
I think we're going to experience an education renaissance, because now we have the chance for a lecture style
Yeah.
alongside individual question and answer style, because I missed what the teacher just said in real time. I don't think they're enemies. I think there's a way that they can
Yeah.
coexist.
I agree. Yeah. Yeah. So we're moving into a time where information is open, information is free. You can hop onto YouTube. You can, if I look at my son, I keep referring to him because I'm in awe of a 12-year-old. He started 3 years ago. He picked up an iPad and an iPad pencil and downloaded Procreate. My husband's an artist, actually, so there was Procreate on the iPad, and he just used YouTube tutorials to learn how to draw. And then he was stumbled on animation. And now it's only 2-3 years later, and he's the one who's creating content and tutorials. Now you look at that and you're like, what is that going to be in 2-3? Are there even going to be universities? I mean, like you say, this is, or the fundamentals of universities will change. So a place where maybe people can all go and access the internet.
Rocky said that if it's true that the AI knows everything, it's only the quality of your questions that matter.
Yeah, I love that.
So who is influencing your questions? It's going to be the books you read, but also the people you're around. So like with the syndicate, I know Paul in the South and Vance in the East and Rocky in California and the folks in Australia with Mitch.
We're not even, I mean, look at even us knowing each other. I mean, it's not like we are in the company together, but we almost are in a way. We're all building the Stacks community where we all met. It was like a great big village where we've all come together and we spend time with each other, not because we've walked into an interview, but because we've walked into Bitcoin and the idea of Bitcoin and using Bitcoin as part of our daily life.
When I first met Hero, Peace, and the rest, I said, so what is your North Star metric? And they said they wanted to unlock the 1.4 trillion of Bitcoin value. And I liked that approach because, again, going back to school, Adam Smith says that capital is a wagon way through the air. If you hold it in your pocket, it's dead. It's the productive allocation of value and right in capital, the productive allocation.
Yeah.
And so I said, okay, so if you have a dead asset that has gone from joke to one of the largest ideas on the planet by market cap, then perhaps there is a business opportunity in unlocking Bitcoin as collateral for, let's say, commercial real estate.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And so that's kind of full circle with
I agree. It's this idea that, you know, and I mean, that was part of, anyway, the white paper, that it would eventually become something that could be exchanged. You know, it's a system. It's a cash. It was built to be exchanged and used. You know, it was just, I don't think you can expect, when he wrote that white paper, for him to know everything that would become. He's not a fortune teller. You know, he was a futurist, obviously, and designed something extraordinary.
And his name is Craig Wright. He's from Australia. I think he's in Asia now.
Really? Satoshi?
Yeah. Did you know Satoshi's named Craig Wright? He's from Australia.
No.
Yeah. Actually, there was a court.
Why is P saying LL? Why are you teasing me?
Oh, no, I'm really teasing the audience. So there was a court case in Florida.
Because I don't read the news. I told you, I don't go on social media except for the last week where I was watching like people high on fentanyl being interviewed. I mean, it was just like, that's what you get sucked into. What the fuck? You know, I'd rather be reading Nexus.
Religion used to be the opiate of the masses. Now it's fentanyl.
Yeah. I'm like, what? I didn't even know that there's this like mad, crazy world out there. So my husband knows, because I don't consume any media. My husband, I just said, if something bad, really bad is happening, then let me know. Otherwise, I'm going to quietly sit here and prepare for the zombie apocalypse, grow my peaches and my strawberries, and learn about Bitcoin.
I like it. It's a good partnership.
Yeah, man. It's too. I can't think clearly. With, you know, I was reading a thing the other day that was saying that in the good old days where we just had the newspaper, people would wake up in the morning and they'd read the paper over breakfast. Then they would go to work and they would talk around the water cooler about what they read in the newspaper. And they would be reading about pretty much, you know, one or two international things, but mostly local concerns. Then they would have the whole day, they would bump into people during the course of the day, and they would talk about what they read in the newspaper. Then they would go to bed at night. They would only read the news once a day, and they would spend the next 24 hours talking about it and processing it while they were sleeping. Now we're bombarded with news every minute of the day. So it is messing up. And that, again, goes back to your dopamine hits. I mean, we can't survive in this way. You know, that's why I stopped.
The men and women consume each other rapidly through what they call the act of love, or else settle down to a mild form of conjugality. We seldom find a mean between these extremes. That's how Camus described it.
How who?
Albert Camus. He had this passage where he said, the men and women consume each other rapidly through what they call the act of love, or else settle down to a mild form of conjugality. We seldom find a mean between these extremes.
Yeah.
And so I find that when we have a full day, I think we can do all of it. The frenzied stuff, the relaxed stuff, like it's almost going back to depression. I don't think I'm any less depressed than I was before. I just have.
You've accepted it into your body and you live with it in a way. And
I leverage it.
It's like in yoga. You find the peace in the discomfort, or you find the comfort in the discomfort. That's what my yoga teacher always says when we're like in one of those poses where you feel like, I can't do this. You find that place, and that is surely life.
Alan Watts said of Carl Jung, he liked Carl Jung because Carl Jung could feel anxious without feeling ashamed about feeling anxious.
Right.
I don't think the anxiety is the problem. It's the idea that if we're perfect people, we should not feel these things. And I think at our perfection, we feel all of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
especially the bad parts, because the polarities are creative. It's those
Yeah.
periods where we're upset at ourselves that actually catalyze ourselves forward.
Of course. That is when growing happens. It's the hardest thing. Growing pains. I mean, it's got a name.
Peaks are connected to valleys, and valleys are connected to
Yeah.
peaks.
Yeah. So Bitcoin, you believe, are you here because you believe in a better world? Are you here because you're interested in what you can learn? Or are you here just to make money? I think, are those the three, would you say those would be the three options that most people would choose from?
It's funny because we've talked about this as a syndicate. We're like, why the hell are we here? Why do we keep doing this? And we came up with a few things. It's
Okay.
depression, curiosity, and almost like a need for adventure.
Right.
It's the adventure that makes things interesting. Because at the end of the day, all these things are here today, gone tomorrow. So at the end of our life, we're just going to look at it like it was an excuse to play the game.
Yeah.
Let's see what game B is all about next. But
Right.
what keeps me
I like
going,
that a lot.
most of this stuff, I know that everything I found important 5 years ago is not important. And I expect that to evolve over time.
Mhm.
But with the candidates I get along with, I remember Caesar was a candidate I had from the Dominican, and he was the IT manager for a golf resort in the Caribbean. And I'm like, why the hell would you leave the sunny Caribbean on a golf course where nothing ever goes wrong with IT? And you want to start from scratch here? And he said, yeah. And I said, why? He said, adventure. And immediately I knew.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, it's like a tragic flaw to have an insatiable need for new learning and new experiences. Sometimes I wish I could just be a bartender. I'll be honest with you. 10 years ago, I was like, yo, maybe I should just fucking shut off my brain
Yeah.
and just confine myself to just moving and just let my brain go. And I have not been able to do it. I have not been able to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. But that's it. I guess that is the answer. You know, I think whatever the flavor of your adventure, whatever it is, whether it is wanting to make the money or wanting to change the world, it's still.
You know what's funny? If I make money, it's for the people around me, because I like to see the people around me get paid from the work. So, all this work we're doing with the syndicate and helping people and sometimes processing transactions, I get a kick out of the people around me being happy. Right? By the time because I'm in sales, by the time the money.
Isn't it? Imagine life if the people around you weren't happy. What's the point? What's the point of the adventure if it's like boring?
Because I'm in sales, when the money comes in, that's kind of the low point.
Yeah.
Right? So
that's my idea. Where's the next?
What's the next thing? Okay, that's done. What's the next thing? What's the next thing? What's the next thing? And so to me, by seeing the people I work with the most experience that personal transformation, whether it's self-improvement, meeting God of their own understanding, or even laughing together, working on something serious, I'm enjoying that as a daily yoga. That is my chopping wood and carrying water. And if I can do that every day, whether or not we reach this, God laughs at our plans. So, we're never going to reach that thing the way we intended it. And by the way, if the result of success is not what you get, but who you become, the person who set the goal isn't going to be there by the time you achieve it, because you're someone else. So the daily yoga of turning work into something I used to hate into something that I look forward to, because these challenges are a way to burn away the impurities in myself. That's something you'll wake up to do in the morning.
Yeah. I really like that. I wish I had more time to speak to you. I think we have to actually do this again. I think we have to have like a monthly.
We could.
Mel on the block. There we go.
Mel on the block. Mel chain.
Yeah. There we go. Oh, well, you're the block. No, I'm thinking block. You're the Mel in the block.
Melon the block. I like it. And then
Yeah.
we can interview GPSC and tease him for being Filipino.
Yeah, we can just have the morning news actually at night in the middle of the with
We should
Mel
we'll
talking.
have serious people on who never get a chance to talk about their product because we asked them about esoteria.
It's like I don't know what happened when we got involved with the morning news. It kind of we went a bit rogue. But
I
yeah, there's
enjoyed
so
it.
much I wanted to talk to you about.
We covered a lot,
Yeah,
I will say.
yeah. As long as we said
You have to
Bitcoin.
say Bitcoin 3 times and Craig Wright will come into your house. Yes.
Okay. Oh, there we go. Yes, Bitcoin,
Try it
Bitcoin.
with me. Craig Wright, Craig Wright, Craig Wright.
Craig Wright, Craig Wright, Craig Wright. I'm going to Google this straight as after our friends. Why don't I know
They
this?
are going to be so angry at you at the end of this call. You have no idea. Craig Wright is the enemy of all the Bitcoin and Stacks people.
Why does he say he's Satoshi?
Yes. And on top of that, he's actually won court cases that imply that he is in Florida. Mhm.
No.
They never talk about it because, like, if the Satoshi wallets are real, then the guy who hates all of the BTC people actually has 1.1 million of them. So, but that's for next time.
Yes, join us again as we uncover who is Satoshi. Are you Satoshi? By mere fact that you own the Bitcoin? Are we all Satoshi? Is Satoshi within us? These are questions that we should be covering. We will be covering next time. Well, it's been amazing having you on the show. Thank you very much for joining me. And I hope to do it again.
I was nervous about it because I wanted the show to be good.
Yeah, I think it was. Hopefully it was. I really enjoyed
I
speaking to you.
enjoyed it, so screw them.
Yeah, as long as we're
I
having
enjoyed
fun,
it.
it's our reality. Let's manifest it. We are manifesting that you all loved the show. Thank you for joining us on Bitcoin and Beyond. I'm Melanie Carstens. I'm your host. We are here every week on Thursday at 12 p.m. ET. Please join us. Please head over to my YouTube channel and hit the subscribe and like buttons. Oh, I need a manicure. And yeah, join us again. We're also on X, on Deorganized Media every day. Myself, GPSC, Blockface, and our wonderful pioneer, Peace Love. He is also producing for us today. So a huge thanks to Peace and a huge thanks to Deorganized Media. A huge thanks to Bitcoin Live DB for powering this all. Have I said everything? It must sound like it. Final words from you.
Together alone, that's right, together alone. Have you ever wanted to hang out with other people, but just hated being around other people? Well, that's why we created Together Alone. So the next time someone asks you to hang out, say, sure, let's get together, but this time, let's get together separately. Together alone. Let's get together alone.